No.
Good morning. Thanks for coming. Uh, Still a lot of people. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Amelia, for this amazing, let's say, celebration of architecture here. We have had a great time here, meeting a lot of very interesting people. It's been a real joy and difficult to believe it's almost over. Um, we called the lecture Presence. Um, it's a terminology that, among a few others, we are having in mind at the moment, but not really time to think about more or more deeply. But yeah, so it's kind of tentative what I'm gonna say now in the beginning. I had the good pleasure every morning to walk along the Douro, the river. And I saw the ocean, I saw the city, I walked up the hill. There were these beautiful little blue flowers that are blooming at the moment. So there were, a lot of little moments that caught my attention. And I think, nature has this amazing power, the ocean, the mountains, this kind of sublime power. I think all the arts have that power, you can go to the movies, you can get lost for 2 hours if you get caught up by the story. We listen to a lot of music in the office. We kind of get lost in soundscapes, and of course, architecture has that power of creating a certain presence. For us, this is quite unrelated to what kind of style of a building it is, what kind of time it comes from. It can be very old structures, it can be contemporary buildings, it can be by famous architects or by architects that no one knows. It's this capability of things to it's not necessarily beauty, not necessarily beauty, but it's just somehow you get lost in something or with something, you drift away. And I think it's an important function. It's a critical function of architecture to be able to do that. I'm looking at my own life. I'm usually kind of in a hurry or have to do this or that, and most of the time I'm actually spending in the future. Not because I'm a very utopian guy, but just because I have to think about what's the painter gonna do tomorrow, what kind of brick we are gonna use in the next building in 1 year. So just being in the here and now is not happening too often, and I think architecture has that capability. It's a psychological function of architecture. It's a kind of relief function. Well, this for a very short introduction about, and of course it's something we kind of also try to achieve with what we do. Whether this is a drawing or a model or a building or a text about architecture, to create a presence that to catch others' attention. The lecture itself is now structured chronologically. I'm not going to show every project, don't worry. It's a selection, but they are ordered in chronological order. Our collaboration, Charlotte's and mine, started 15 years ago, basically with a journey that we did to Yemen. It was during the time of the Second Iraq War. I think we were together with one French guy, more or less the only tourists in the country. And I'm not gonna talk too much now about Yemenite architecture. It's of course also an architecture of great presence, but I think let's say the metaphor of the journey is very important for our office. I think each project is a little journey in itself. I oftentimes use the example of Columbus, who not far away from here left with a different plan in mind, but he had the courage, at least, to go into a place where somehow nobody had been before. He didn't really end up where he planned to go, which is also happening to us very often. But we really try to look at each project as a new adventure, as a new story. We try to be very open at the outset, and for that reason, this journey was is a kind of trajectory we try to use each time.
Okay. Oh. So the first project we're going to show is the house with a tree. It's basically the first house we built together, or we were able to realize. It's, or sometimes we also say it's the first half house, because it's somehow also half a house. It's located in the middle of Basel, in the center of the city, 19th century city extension, right at the edge to very large industrial area on the right of the image of Roche, where now, for those who know Basel a bit, there's being a lot of changes, and also this image is kind of old. The house is actually a modest house from the 30s, located on a corner. This is the way we found it. Little house with the tree, which was very dominant. So it was very much the dialogue of this existing house with this tree. And it was in a state of jungle, very overgrown as we found it. Maybe also the story of the house, and also why this collaboration with Pierre Demeron. It was actually his parents' house, and he was born in the house. And on this image is actually his childhood, his children's room. And this is maybe also the why I show this image, is that this was the only room where we took down a wall. So this is more or less showing this moment. He had approached us because his mother had recently died, and so the house was empty, and he wanted it to be renovated so that his daughter could move in with some friends. So we were approached to do just a little renovation of it, and what we quickly found out was that in terms of building law, in fact, there would be quite a lot of potential on the site to extend it to build over the whole corner. And what we decided is in the process, I mean, that we wanted to do a little bit of extension, adding some area to the house, but we didn't want to destroy the tree and this important dialogue, we thought. So the conclusion was to somehow make extensions to the existing house. Maybe here I need to point, or do we have to? Let's see. No, I don't. Whatever. On every side, it's okay. On every side of the house, there is a little extension. There's a little, so here's the tree, this is the existing house, and then you have basically on every side of the house a little extension. So we have some added area to the house. So the topic of composition became very, very important in the process of work. How do you put these elements together? So it was a very playful, long process of putting these different elements together. This is the series of model images. As I mentioned, we kept, I mean, it's a modest house of the 30s with very small room structure, but we thought this was actually a quality of the house, and we wanted to maintain this. And so here is just a little addition of a bay window in one room. which allow the bay window is basically a little table and a shower in the bathroom. This is the first floor. And here in the top roof, there is this one wall we took out in the middle, where there was Pierre's bedroom. Then there's the loggia structure in the garden, which is basically a balcony with a photovoltaic structure on it. And the corner tower, the most dominant element, together with the tree. So this is then the final composition. In plan, you also see the different elements in black, the new elements, so the corner window, the bay window, the tower, and in the garden we see the one post of the loggia, which is like also a trunk of a tree. And we were very much interested in this interweaving of the old and the new, so that they really they become like interconnected elements. And there's also a certain ambiguity of what is old, what is new. We used the wood, I mean, maybe to mention also the wood tower, where it came from, because it was not maybe the most obvious choice to use wood on this location, but it had also to do with the story of the house, because as probably most of you know, Herzog and Dömer, they were already at school together, and there was like this story coming up that they were also building a lot of things already as kids in this one room, because there used to be a wood factory just across the road. And so we kind of wanted to also integrate this story of the two of them building. Plus we used old recycled wood panels, because we were interested also again in this patina and like blurring the borders of what is new and old somehow. So it was a selection process that we did it. This is the entrance room with the maintained entrance how it is, and you can just show your bikes. Also bringing in, of course, the context. It's actually location is quite nice on a big square with the fountain. So we plan to have a window to the fountain to kind of bring in the context of the house.
Another issue we are quite interested in is the elements. I'm not gonna turn into a feng shui master now, but I think the classical elements are really important for architecture, in not only in, or let's say in two ways mostly, in a pragmatic way, because water is a great enemy, for instance, but also in a poetic way. So at the time the house happened, so here for instance we see a big gutter that collects all the rainwater and kind of spreads it over to the tree. At the time the house was created, I was also working on this book together with José Luis Mateo, a Spanish architect, who I was assistant of at ETH. And there is this Semper you see on the left here, the Caribbean hut by Gottfried Semper, who wrote a book about the main elements, the basic elements of architecture. And there's a beautiful interconnection between the natural elements and the architectural ones. But the natural ones are almost like to come first, and then come the architectural ones. So there is a connection between, let's say, the earth and gravity and the foundation. There is a connection between air and ventilation. There is a connection between light and the heating inside. So let's say the sun, and as the last one, water, which is usually, you can say, connected to the roof. So with these four elements, you can, in very basic terms, create like a Urhut, like the most basic elements. Ventilation. You deal with how big is the opening, how big are the openings. So it's a way of thinking about architecture if you think about the elements. So This is strange. So each one of them is connected to a very basic element of a house. In this particular case, we used only point foundations. We had to deal with a lot of roots. For instance, we insulated the entire house with a very special plaster to optimize its energy balance. It's basically functioning quite autonomously, which is stupid in a city, I think. And most of Switzerland, that cities try to produce as green energy as possible outside of the city, and then it's a network that the houses are connected to. But in this particular place in the city, this house was not connected to the network, so it's kind of functioning autonomously, which I think is usually a better model when you build in the land. So here we see this process of putting on this plaster in many layers, so many of the details, let's say the plasticity of the final house came out of the working process. It was not so much designed by us. Perhaps at this point it's also worth saying that we also built these houses. We spend a lot of, we are not building them, but we do the supervision, so we spend a lot of time on these construction sites, day in and day out. Again, most of these details are rather pragmatic. This is the bay window. Here we have this solar loggia. There's a beautiful analogy in German between Bau and Baum, the one meaning building, the other tree. We had to do this loggia because it was no problem. It's no problem. You can take the car. We had to do this loggia in that direction because the house is really facing north-south, and so this was like the optimum direction to gain as much exposure as possible. Here again, how it kind of stands in front of the tree and is kind of a built tree, even with photosynthesis, converting sunlight into energy. The analogy goes even further. Was a prefabricated structure. The column came, the piece, kind of a dream house that somehow landed there. Takes up the context also with its inclined ceiling, a roof. And in the inside, it was, in many respects, beyond the renovation, also a lot about the restoration. So we tried to keep original elements. For instance, there were old paintings that were taken down, but you had the shadows of the past life that was occurring there. We call this our Steiner detail. So we had to put in a lot more installations, and Rudolf Steiner is an anthroposoph close to Basel. It's let's say subconscious level, quite influential in the city still today. In the end, then it looked like this. So again, a form that we didn't really design so much, but is more a result of just integrating all the new pipes and so on. This is the bay window from the inside, which takes reference to the Roche buildings, the modernist Roche buildings, the horizontality of them. This wooden room facing the park, which is very awkward in a city like Basel to have a wooden chamber. The old wood, the light, the top room. And this is how it's gonna be. We are the little point. So this is where we are, and this is gonna happen in the next 10 years, 15 years, but not by us, not by us. But to remain in the big scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So quite at the moment when we had completed this house, we were invited to take part in a competition for the Natural History Museum and City Archive, also in Basel. The plan was to make, or the brief to make a building that would house these two institutions. I mean, the Natural History Museum is actually quite a, it was the first museum in Basel, in a really pretty classical museum in the city center. And together with the city archive, they wanted to gather the two institutions in one new building at the rather north edge of Basel. The Volta area, which is now quite the industrial area, but which is a bit about to change. But there, it has a kind of tradition of silo storage buildings. So in a way, it fits quite well for this huge archive of life that this new structure was supposed to be. The site was extremely difficult because it was along, or it is along the track lines and very long and narrow. And so it was quite challenging how to accommodate this huge program with a lot of storage area on this site. And for us, it was important because you had these two institutions that they would still, even though they're connected in a building and they share a lot of functions and pragmatic issues, but that they would still have their own expression in a way, especially also in their own structural expression. So you have more the tower, the city archive, which is a more massive structure with openings, and the Natural History Museum part, which is more a skeletal, huge monumental skeletal structure. So that each of these institutions would have somehow their anatomic expression. Yeah, so you see the city archive tower and the long Natural History Museum with its very large skeleton. And the city archive with the tower. For us, it was important that the tower would be also accessible for the public. So we placed the city archive library on the top, so it would be like an accessible storage tower. And then this kind of foyer with the special form would be like the entrance point to the two institutions.
We are also working quite a lot on different exhibitions, sometimes designing them or just producing the content. In this case, we were asked also to, was a group exhibition and about architecture and books. And we were at the ETH, where we come from, or where we studied. And it somehow, we were asked, or came up that we could do something with that space. It's a foyer, it's a very, let's say, a building without a lot of expression, very neutral spaces, and this is probably the most neutral one of them. It's a foyer space where people enter, go through, was never really used before. Also, when we encountered the space, there was a Dan Graham exhibition, but Dan Graham was very unhappy that the sculpture was actually standing in that space. He would have liked to have it outside. And but at the same time, it was a time where we really did not have a lot to do, and it's probably one of our most conceptual works in that sense, because we really started without any formal ideas. What we could do, we just started by writing. Also, the first sentence kind of expresses our existential situation at that time. The jobless architect writes. So they were between humorous and cynical and whatever these sentences. And so we started with that, and we had the good luck yeah, we somehow researched. Of course, we are for different reasons quite influenced by the work of Venturi Scott Brown and their use of language, and also their use of language as, let's say, a spatial element, as an ornamental element to, you know, it's beyond language, it takes on space. So we're quite fascinated by their interaction between space and language. Language creates space was kind of also one of the slogans we had. This, in the end, the people at the school didn't. Here you see this kind of very generic school we come from, you know, where everything looks the same. The library, like the auditorium, they didn't allow us to do that. But on the inside, we could, in fact, then work on these slogans. We then worked with a very talented graphic designer who, for each one, kind of found a new. I was also inspired, it seems, by the task, and yeah, this is in the end how it turned out. It was really a layer of language on top of the space. Was also good to write that word once in a school you come from. And there was a mixture there. For instance, in the front we see books by Christian Keretz about his projects in China. There were also pictures of the Venturis from the archive we integrated. You see them on the left there from their own exhibitions they did, their engagement with pop art. Here, this is the book machine by Rain Colas in front, all the texts he has written himself. And sometimes there were little framed quotes by Robert Venturi. But it turned into, as I say, it went also beyond the content of what was written. It was also a very graphical thing, an ornamental thing to use language in that way.
The Housing Studio Basel was a competition. We were invited for big new housing structure in the north of Basel. It's currently there is the studio. That's why the name comes from Studio Basel, which is the television studio of the Swiss television studio, but the culture television is located in Basel, and they are now moving into a new building. So this is going to be liberated, and they were looking for housing. I mean, they're now developing a housing structure for I think 42 apartments, so quite a big structure. We were quite inspired by the plan of this neighborhood. It's called Bruderholz. Is the first garden city of Switzerland on the northern hill of Basel, and it was designed by Erwin Hemann, a student of Karl Moser. And so we quite quickly actually came up with the idea or inspiration that we, rather than placing a series of buildings on this quite large plot or continuing the block, we would try to work with one large-scale organic structure that would somehow integrate the whole apartment, 42 apartments, and be placed in a big garden. And so also that the big volume that was required to be on the plot would kind of be hidden by this large garden that we developed together with Vogt. And somehow the importance then is more also on the corners, where the building meets the corner, rather than just continuing the existing structure of the block. So like the one who won. Then the organic, but then this organic figure was actually organized in a very logical cellular way. So it was not all free form, but it was, we tried to very much put a lot of energy in a very organized plan and modular plan. And so that basically all the different required sizes of apartments would have views and access to facades on different sides. So I think they were quite interesting apartments. And this figure was very controlled because for us it was, we really were eager to win it. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but we tried to really prove that the form was very much under control and modular, and that it would be very easy to build it. Yeah, here's the view of the apartment with the view in both sides.
Well, after this 42 room, Charlotte just told me, after this 42 room project, a one room project.
Apartment, 42 apartments.
42 apartments to a one room project, kind of installation. It's called the Pantone Stupa. We are it's called the Architects of Trust of a museum in Basel, the Kunsthalle. And this museum, the director, he acquired this lamp by Werner Pantone, the Danish designer who spent most of his life in a suburb of Basel. This is from the living room, a picture from about early 70s, together with his wife, who is still alive. Pantone is dead by now. And this lamp went into storage. So it was hanging in different constellations as they got bigger and bigger houses. And it always filled up the entire living room. There were pieces added this time. But more or less in 30 years it was in storage. And because he died 30 years ago. And now the widow sort of allowed the Kunsthalle to reinstall it in a place in the museum. So that is this room as we found it. Was a restaurant, kind of not much going on, but the Kunsthalle itself is an important institution. There were a lot of artists, American, etc., who did their first exhibition there, so they are very eager to promote talents. This is how it got then installed after a long process. There were different options also to spread it, and ultimately it turned out too tedious to do that. But we hired a lot of freelance students to hang the lamp. They came and we had to reinstall a lot of pieces 1 week long. They were kind of putting this lamp together again. It consists, I think, out of 52 circular pieces, and it's a kind of shell. It's a shell. They're translucent. It also makes beautiful sound when the wind blows through. So it's not only a visual. There was also only one sketch how to install it. This is not that sketch. This is the electrical conduits we had to reinstall. This is not a drawing by us, but by our electrician. And we also did the furniture in the space. We tried to pick up the round geometries. We tried to create a kind of frame, a bench that would go around the entire space. That would also give different options how to use the space. You can take out. There's a lot of different events going on there. Usually it's a restaurant during the day, but you can also rent a room for a party, etc. And this is how it then looked after finishing it. Again, an exhibition project. This is, I think, the second last project we show today. It was for the Chicago Architecture Biennial last year, called Sonsbeck Ready-Made. There was a very strict brief for the ones who also participated. They know you had to do in the section that we were. You had to choose an image of an interior image of a space you like, but at the same time you had then to make a model of it and on a certain plinth that you were offered to do. So everything was kind of very pre-described what should happen. So first of all, it was not so easy to find. We had also other spaces in mind, but it turned out the model would be much too big if we would build it in that scale. But being very, well, we somehow came across the Sonsbeck Pavilion, just fitted perfectly that given area. We also admire him a lot, Aldo van Eyck. I think he's a very underestimated architect, especially as a writer. And we loved this project, the Sonsbeck Pavilion, with its in-between spaces, and yeah, just a very beautiful project. So in the end, we took this up, and in a certain way, we started drawing the project. Then a little bit there were the plinths, the plinths were the sculptures originally placed in the pavilion, and they raised a little bit a question: what, should we redo also the sculptures, or what should we put on them? And we had already and more the idea came up. Well, let's just basically not do anything in that project except for selecting things. I mean, the exhibition had the title "Make New History," so we thought, we had the impression it would be a bit of subversive comment also to that title, to just do basically nothing. And so we decided to take the pavilion as it is, build it in very cheap materials, styrofoam, and put ready-mades found objects on this plinth. And so here you see the result from the top view of the structure, already some of the ready-mades appearing on the side. And here a movie now of, there you see also some text fragments. We also took as ready-mades quotes by Andy Warhol from a fantastic book. And Andy Warhol was also dealing a lot with this issue of, automatic, not doing anything. He tried to be quite uninvolved in his own art. And as you see these ready-made objects, there's a scale twist. They suddenly start to appear like pop art objects. And the quotes, were another level. Some of them quite nice. For instance, this one, "I hate objects." Also the soundtrack by Fellini, another as found element. But ultimately it was interesting that basically without doing anything except for selecting things, something could still gain new meaning. This is then the top view, where you see all the, 32 objects within that structure. And this is the last project.
Yeah, and Villa Hammer. This again, or this project is a collaboration with Herzog and de Meuron. They basically, in this case, it's not a personal connection to the house, but they initiated this project, testing whether at all it would be possible to build something there, and we were then asked to further develop the work and construct the house also. In this case, it's again a composition with an existing house. This time it's not at all a modest house, it's a very luxurious Baroque villa, neo-Baroque villa. But it's located actually in walking distance, a few minutes away from the house with a tree. And so there's the existing house, neo-Baroque villa, and the idea was to densify the plot a bit and add a new house in the back yard with 2 apartments. So you have the existing house on the left, and then you have the new backyard, courtyard, back courtyard construction. And the new house really is an apartment building, has 2 apartments, and so the lower apartment is this is an existing structure, the so-called annex structure of the existing house, and so the ground level apartment is connecting to that, and it's very much taking up the logic of this annex structure. So it's really on the back of the firewall and opening up to the garden. And then there's a second unit, a maisonette apartment, which has openings into the 3 directions. So you have the existing house. Maybe I have to say here is also the program is it was a back and forth of different possibilities, but now finally, and we are now finishing it these days. It's Childcare Center, so there will be a Childcare Center in here, and then the 2 apartments in the back. So the ground level apartment again. You have the firewall to the neighbors. You enter through a big kitchen, which is like in a farmhouse somehow, big kitchen, living room, and then you have the bedrooms and a kind of guest apartment. And then the upper floor apartment, you go up, and this apartment has a lot of terraces, and you enter in a big living room with a kitchen, and you have the bedrooms and bathroom on the top level. And here very much the topic was a lot about now this dialogue here with the existing house. So trying to take up certain elements like the window ornamentation, but with a bit of a twist. So taking in a way, again, also the topic of the ready-made, taking one-to-one objects that you find, but then, for instance, through this operation of stretching the window, making it somehow clear that it's not just reconstruction, and also through the use of a new building technique. It's a wooden house, making very clear that it's a contemporary project. So this is now view that the new structure is already completed, and people have moved in already. So you have the big the ground level apartment to the garden. There's the little entrance hut with a wardrobe. It's kind of like levitating between the 2, the floating element on the top and the ground level. There's some views of these wooden ornaments. We scanned the existing house, so they're one-to-one scans, which we then milled in wood. I mean, we had to adjust a little bit the geometries, but more or less it started with a copy. You see also how the house in section relates to the heights of the existing house, so that the roof line, maybe I have to also add, of course, the house is listed, so it was quite hard to get the whole building permission. And so one big argument was that it should not go higher, and it had to take up the same roof line. But you see also in the section the big stretched window that allows like for a double-story situation, and the little wardrobe house which doesn't touch the top, which is like floating. This is the large kitchen that the ground floor apartment opened to the garden. Now it's much greener. I've taken a while ago. As mentioned, it's a wooden fab house that was built up basically within 2 weeks. We also added a few steel elements to make it lighter. Because of the condition with the firewall, we had to, it was almost impossible to do it without a corridor, but we actually started really enjoying the corridor, and we think also it's a underestimated element these days in housing especially. You almost are not allowed to do a corridor anymore, but in fact it has some nice qualities, or just adding a few windows can actually make it quite nice. This is the annex part that was existing, but we had to reconstruct certain elements using the materials that were there. This is then when you go of the first floor to the terrace, the entrance terrace. You can read well the connection to the existing house. Yeah, these window elements, but yeah, working with geometrical figures that are around, but sometimes also not really. So it's also a bit of a ambiguity of what is there and what is new. And we thought that was kind of an interesting discussion. This is the main living room of the maisonette apartment. And then the top floor, where we just added little things, for instance, a window axis going through the little rooms, which gives suddenly quite the generosity. Then the view down to the porch, which maybe is heavily debated, because a certain voices think it's a bit too much, but we actually, it came out of a pragmatic thing that when finally it was decided that it's going to be a childcare center, that needed to be a sort of limit, a clear limit between the housing part and the childcare garden. And we actually, I think it's too much is never enough somehow. But it's
we even gonna add a little temple now. So
yeah, the temple is coming. Yeah.
Let's put one on top of it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.